Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 21st of March 2024. If you don't know what the lines mean on my map, please pause the video and check out the key. It's going to be a fairly quick one today. Always say that. Because I'm not going to go into any granular detail. There's still activity going on north of the border. Not really sure exactly what has taken place. I believe Krynky is still one of the main areas of activity. I saw a claim just now that they've taken some Russian prisoners, and the Russian prisoners are open to joining the ranks of the RDK, the Russia Volunteer Corps. So that's one of the things that's come out. I'd never quite trust someone you're fighting against just to join sides straight away and be like, yeah, you're not going to shoot me, are you? Yeah, but nonetheless, interesting situation developing there. But yeah, I talked in one of this morning's videos about being quite unsure how wise all of these attacks have been and what they're achieving, and whether they have achieved more destruction of the Russian equipment than Ukrainian. I say Ukrainian Free Russia fighters, but they are using Ukrainian equipment, and I'm not sure that's the case at the moment. So I think they've taken some of their own fairly significant losses, particularly in terms of equipment, and I don't think that it's yet worth it. But I hope that it eventually will be, but we'll see. Moving on to the Eastern Front, going from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. There is not a lot to report from Kupiansk to Svatova, which is all good news. There's some small gains for the Russians around the Terny area, getting very close to Terny indeed, along this forest here just to the east of Terny. This is super important. Reporting from Ukraine's video was on this today in terms of Liman, which is quite a key city. If you remember the counter-offensive that took all this area back, it was all about surrounding Liman and eventually the Russians skedaddling away from there. Well, at the moment, the Russians are looking to get over the river here, the Zherebets River, in order to advance towards Liman. But the Ukrainians, as according to reporting from Ukraine, are pushing hard up here in the forest to the south of that salient, and therefore it's important for the Russians, if they want to succeed, to do well in the forest as well as pushing to the west here. They don't want to extend themselves too much and be cut off by a Ukrainian attack along the base of the salient. So that's what's happening. There are some gains, as mentioned, in the area. Syriac map says the Russian army continue advancing west of Terny and reach positions located 600 meters from the first houses of the locality. And since there's an agreement between the two mappers, broadly speaking, in fact, Andrew Perpetua has the Russians further to the west there. That is worrying for the Ukrainians in terms of keeping hold of Terny. Anyway, as we come further to south, we're actually going to stop at Bilohorivka. There's no change to this first front line, but Bilohorivka is one of these places that there's been fierce fighting over it, but it's topographically very difficult for either side to budge here. Just to remind you, you've got high ground circling all around here, and then you've got this deep gravel pit, or it looks like chalk, doesn't it? Which has, as you can see, high ground to the east and then high ground to the west of there. This is not accentuated either, so this is all one-to-one topography, and the Russians are trying to push in from the east over here on the high ground. First of all, they had to get up to this area by coming down some high ground to a bit of a gorge, or I guess at least have to grapple with the gradient of coming down and then going up and pushing the Ukrainians back from there. But then once they're here, it becomes quite difficult because the Ukrainians have the high ground over to the west. And so, yeah, it's going to be a case of lobbing at each other from high ground to high ground. Now, they're going to struggle coming from the north because they have to negotiate coming across the river and getting equipment across the river. That's why this area is super important just here, because they're across the river and they can get equipment up onto this high ground. That's going to be super key. The chances of them getting equipment down actually a fairly steep slope onto the Tversky Donetsk River and then getting it back up again onto the other bank is really slim Slim chance of that happening. They tried crossing the Seversky Donetsk towards the beginning of the war, and they lost about 100 pieces of kit. It was absolutely staggering. So they've got some pretty bad form in terms of trying to cross that river. Now, the Euromaidan Press has a bit of a thread on Bilohorivka. You want to know how Ukraine can resist Russia in 2024? Look to Bilohorivka. Tatarigami analysed satellite images, videos and testimonies from a city heroically resisting the Russian onslaught to show the tactics Ukraine could use to gain the advantage. Well, to be quite fair, it's not like the city's providing any resistance. I mean, it's flattened. You've got a relatively small establishment settlement in the middle of this whole area, and it has basically been rubberized. Anyway, Bilohorivka says Euromaidan Press, a town in Sversk direction, has been holding out against daily Russian attacks for over a year. Despite ammunition shortages and a lack of air defense, Ukrainian units have heroically resisted Russian advances in this strategically important area. As you can see there, it's the key to the rest of the Sversk, right? So if the Ukraine can hold out here, then it allows them to hold out really all along the Seversky Donetsk river there. And then down further to the south, Sperna and other places, Bilohorivka down here, another Bilohorivka and Berestova. If they can hold out in this Bilohorivka, then it makes it really difficult for the Russians to advance on Seversk. They have to do it by flanking Bilohorivka, and that's a worry at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, is this move to the west of Zolotorivka, where the Russians had some success, according to Surat maps, last week, and they could, that could be how they do it, surrounding Bilohorivka and make it operationally very difficult for the Ukrainians to remain there. The Russian assaults typically involve company-sized forces supported by BMPs, tanks, guided airdropped bombs, the carbs, and FPV drones. They aim to swiftly seize positions and fortify themselves, making it difficult for Ukraine to compel them to evacuate due to limited artillery. And actually, that's something I did have. I just wanted to give you a sense of those carb bombs. I just want to give you a sense of how damned big these guided glide bombs really are. So this is Shoigu recently popping around the factory to give them a look over. They are sizable munitions. I mean, look at them. Absolutely huge, some of these bombs. And obviously they go for the 250 up to the 1,500 kilogram munition. And just, absolutely huge. How many of the much larger ones they create, I don't know, but they are using them to great effect against the Ukrainians, including, as mentioned, here in Bilohorivka. Anyway, to continue, they aim to swiftly seize positions and fortify themselves, making it difficult for Ukraine to compel them to evacuate due to limited artillery. Well-constructed fortifications have been crucial in slowing down Russian advances. Bilohorivka showcases Ukraine's ability to exhaust Russian troops and impede their political objectives, such as the complete occupation of the Donbass region. However, Ukraine faces challenges due to constrained artillery resources and a growing number of Russian KAB strikes, so it's carb bombs that I've just shown you. To regain offensive capabilities, Ukraine must undertake another mobilization, rotate and train troops, and receive continued support from the West. Some interesting stuff that's come out over the last 24 hours to suggest that the rotation of troops, and if they get the right munitions and equipment, but particularly this rotation that Syrsky's done, has actually meant that they won't need, at least some people are saying, they won't need as many troops to mobilize as possible. Because there are just more troops that have not seen the front line, not been rotated properly. That was one of the things that Syrsky's done that's been pretty decent, which is that audit of what everyone's doing. It turns out that 30% of the troops have never seen the front line. So that could be really good news going forward. The extensive use of cards poses a persistent challenge, requiring additional Patriot air defense systems and F-16s equipped with advanced air-to-air missiles. Ukraine's investment in fortified defense positions and their concealment will be critical in buying time. Bilohorivka serves as a microcosm of Ukraine's defence strategy. It demonstrates the visibility of the defence concept and suggests that further improvements are possible with adequate personnel for rotations and sufficient artillery ammunition for effective fire support. In 2024, Ukraine must focus on three critical factors: fortifications, manpower and ammunition. By effectively constructing and staffing fortifications, preventing Russian advances through minefields and artillery fire, Ukraine can entrench itself to buy critical time. I think yes and no. I mean, this isn't just a microcosm of everything going on the front line, because I think this has very specific topography that isn't relevant, isn't the case elsewhere. And I think that's really what's enabled the Ukrainians to hold on to Bilohorivka. I think other places need fortifications more to act to act as topography would. Rather than having natural defensive areas, you need to make your defensive fortifications. Anyway, moving on now down to Bakhmut. Surat Map says in Bakhmut front, after several days of operational pause, the Russian army has resumed its attacks on the last Ukrainian-held area of Avdiivka. This is the area to the west of Bakhmut, between Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut, that the Ukrainians have managed to hold the Russians at. There's been no movement for the best part of a week, which has been fantastic for the Ukrainians here. Speaking to Greg Terry yesterday, he was speaking to the commander in Chasiv Yar, I think the battalion commander there, who said that Chasiv Yar, Ivanivska, Chasiv Yar, they are in trouble. I think the idea is that they expect to lose that and then have the defences behind there that will properly be able to withhold the Ukrainians. I guess it all depends on, as mentioned, it's about fortifications, manpower and ammunition. And if all of those things can come together, then Chasiv Yar doesn't need to be lost. But it might well be one of those places that does eventually go. We shall see. And then coming on down to Avdiivka, we can see a couple of advances an advance in the town or the little village of Tonyenka here, and they are moving towards this river. Orlivka, the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back across the river, so the Ukrainians are now adopting the high ground, and I imagine that's eventually where the Ukrainians are going to be. They'll be pushed back to Semenivka and over the river there, and the Russians will probably push up to Umanska. The Ukrainians will try and hold their ground on this higher ground that sits behind the river. The Russians will have to get equipment across the river in order to carry on their attacks. And of course, we know that their attacks involve sending whole loads of BMPs and BTRs and dropping off troops and then skedaddling. And of course, if you can't do that, if everything has to be done on foot because you've got a river, then that makes things a lot more difficult for the way that the Russians are doing their attacks. Now, as you can see here, Surat Map says that the Russian army has taken full control over the locality of Tonyenka. So that's pushing their control west of Tonyenka. And then, this actually comes further down to the south. So that's all we have really for there. We're going to come on further to the south, and you can see some slight gains in Marinka for the Russians, as according to Deep State Map and Surat Maps there. The tweet says Russian army made new advances in a plantation north of Novomikhailivka, and that's over here. So nothing to be said about this minor gain. It is only marked by JR, and thanks JR for doing the mapping. He's an absolute legend. So minor gains for both of these. For Deep State Map, the situation in the Horivka was clarified, so it's not that they've advanced, it's just that it turns out they've got more under their control than Deep State Map had previously thought. But then, some movements in what was quite well heavily fortified area. This area was a decent area of Ukrainian fortification, as it was further to the south of Novomikhailivka. But the Russians have made some small gains there. The claim from Surat Mats is Russian army made new advances in the plantations north of Novomikhailivka. So that is that. But ostensibly been fairly stable along this whole front, really. Avdiivka, some grinding successes, but south from there, this last week has been a lot quieter than it was the week before. And we pass Velika Novosilka, nothing to report there, and get on to Robotina, where Andrew Perpetua agrees with some of the early Surat Maps claims of control, just that kind of tree line. but nothing too significant, just northwest of Verbove. But there's quite a considerable difference between the two mappers here, and I think this kind of speaks volumes really. Surat Maps has huge area of Russian control northeast of Verbove and also southwest of Robotina. Now, although the Russians may eventually take this, and this is kind of how Surat Maps works really, relies on the fact that, well, they're going to take it anyway, so it doesn't really matter if I'm wrong in saying they control it now, because they are incrementally marching forward, and within a week or 2 weeks maybe they'll control Robotina, and so I don't have to roll back when I'm wrong. Unfortunately, what happens is sometimes things don't move, and then 3 weeks later that you have Russians shelling Ukrainians in a position, and then he has to admit that, oh yeah, okay, so the Ukrainians did a counterattack. You're like, yeah, I'm not sure they ever were there, the Russians. So that's the sort of thing that is causing this continuing. It's still going on in public on Twitter, this spat between Andrew Perpetua and Surat Maps, where they're arguing to toss over each other's methodology and how accurate they are. I would side with Andrew Perpetua there, knowing the amount of work he does and the provenance of his claims. One of the things he argues with Surat Maps about is that basically Surat Maps gets it from very few pro-Russian sources, and even TASS news agency and whatnot, and moves things unquestionably when the Russians say. And Andrew Perpetua has a list of his own sources, literally soldiers on the ground, as well as surveying all the open source intelligence sources that he's curated. He knows people up and down the front line, and gets a lot of that data, a lot of his data from there. And his question is always, well, Surat, what are you doing? Who are your sources? What's the original work that you're doing? Anyway, that's by the by, just a bit of internals going on between the mappers. Now, Krynky, no movement there, but I just thought I'd show you some video footage of someone just moving through Krynky. There's nothing dodgy, a beautiful day even, but this is what Krynky looks like. And just look at everything here. You got bullet holes riddling all the walls. You got it's like a bomb site, you'd say, because it physically, literally is a bomb site. Look at the shrapnel and bullet holes everywhere, and just everything is rubble. It's incredibly it's just obviously completely war torn, and it's the sort of place where after the war you're just going to have to bulldoze the entire place and start again, if indeed you're going to bother doing that at all, or leave it and go and build somewhere else. I don't know. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support, and thanks for watching so much of my content today, as many of you have. It is another day of a lot of content. There's just a lot of news happening, as well as the odd live chats that I get involved in. And there's one more coming tomorrow where I'm going to speak to Anastasia Paraskova from Kharkiv Oblast, or from Kharkiv City. I presume she's still living there. We'll have a chat about her experiences since I last spoke to her, probably almost 2 years ago now. It'll be interesting to see how things have changed for her. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, for watching. Take care, and I'll speak soon.